Hello everybody, so there's been a lot going on in the world these days. In this video, we're going to get into some of the more relevant geopolitical news over the past several weeks, with a focus in particular on Israeli aggression in the region and the Zionist lies told to turn these regular unprovoked attacks into self-defense, at least in their eyes. So I'm going to get more into the details of the recent Israeli attacks, some other related news regarding Israel and Syria, with a little bit of a focus on the ever-expanding Israeli settlements in the West Bank, in violation of international law, of course. And then we're going to get into an interview with the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. He was interviewed on RT, so I'm going to get into that interview and his answers in responding to these recent attacks. Like always, the Israeli response to their actions, their justification for their unprovoked attacks on their neighbors is quite absurd, so we're going to get into, the usual Zionist lies being told, and then it looks like the U.S. possibly preparing once again for a war on Iran. So stay tuned to the end for that most recent development, and otherwise, let's get into the news. So like always, Syria is caught in the middle of the geopolitical happenings in the Middle East of the U.S. and Israeli war machines. For those who aren't aware, Donald Trump over the past month has announced that the U.S. troops that were going to be withdrawn from the northeastern Syria are now staying behind to occupy and steal the Syrian oil. So no real big shocker there, but this screenshot here from Iraqi news media shows U.S. forces occupying Syrian oil fields, and like Donald Trump said, we're keeping the oil. So that's the newest development of the U.S. occupation of Syria. And on to the recent Israeli attacks, which of course also involve Syria, like always. So here, coming from Reuters and the Jerusalem Post, the headline, Israel strikes Deputy Islamic Jihad's chief home in Damascus. Islamic Jihad said that the Damascus home of one of its top officials was attacked by Israel early Tuesday morning. The bombing came minutes after Islamic Jihad commander Baha Abu al-Atta was assassinated by Israel in the Gaza Strip in a targeted killing operation carried out jointly by the IDF and the Shin Bet, which is the Israeli security agency. Syrian state news agency Sana said that 2 people were killed dead and 6 others injured after the bombing of the building near the Lebanese embassy in western Meza, Damascus. So this happened on November 12th, and Israel obviously was carrying out a targeted assassination against the leaders of the Palestinian resistance organization Islamic Jihad. So they killed the commander in the Gaza Strip. However, they completely messed up when it came to their attack on the commander in Damascus, hitting his home when he wasn't there, killing his son, a child, as well as another innocent person, and injuring at least 6 others, possibly as many as 9 injured, according to a Damascus source quoted by the Lebanese news agency. Another Israeli aggression unprovoked. They're going to say they're taking out terrorists that threaten Israel, but Islamic Jihad had not attacked Israel at this time. And the one thing that Israel knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that will cause Palestinian resistance groups in the Gaza Strip to respond violently is by assassinating one of their leaders. So, of course, no surprise, Islamic Jihad responded with a barrage of rockets towards Israel that killed 0 people. What does Israel do? Israel responds by dropping bombs across the Gaza Strip for 3 days. Well, for 3 days, this back and forth happened. So during these attacks, the IDF falsely claims it hit a non-existent rocket chief in a strike that killed an entire family of 8. So, of course, Israel always claims to target these, what it calls terrorists, these resistance organizations, and it almost always comes out that they just drop bombs indiscriminately. So here, reading from Israeli newspaper, the article here, this is how they describe it. This is absolutely absurd. The Israeli Defense Forces claimed it targeted a Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist in an airstrike on a house in the central Gaza Strip that killed a Palestinian family of 8 on Thursday morning, in what later emerged to have been a false statement. In other words, a lie. IDF Arabic language spokesperson Avike Adre said the strike targeted the head of the Islamic Jihad's rocket unit, whom he identified as Rasmi Abu Malhous, including a photograph purporting to show him. However, no such figure exists in the Islamic Jihad organization, the IDF officials later told the Haaretz newspaper, and Adre's claim appeared to have been based off of false rumors that were spread on civilian channels on the Telegram application. Unbelievable. So this just showcases the sort of lies that the Israeli occupation forces tell in order to justify their continual bombing of the Gaza Strip. This happens over and over and over again. Israeli officials, of course, claimed that this was all in self-defense and, oh, poor us, our poor civilians are being targeted, and none of them are dying, of course, but they're scared. They have to run to bomb shelters while they're bombing the Gaza Strip, killing innocent civilians, men, women, children. Over 30 were killed in this 3-day period of back and forth. And how did it all start? This wasn't self-defense. This was a targeted assassination that escalated the situation intentionally. This happens time and time again. I've covered it in the past. This is what Israel does. They'll target a Palestinian resistance leader, knowing that they're going to respond violently with rocket strikes. The rocket strikes don't do any damage. They land in open fields. They don't kill any Israeli civilians. What do? They cry self-defense, and then they bomb the Gaza Strip. They literally provoked the situation, doing the one and only thing that they knew would absolutely cause a violent response. And that's what happened. It happens every time that they assassinate one of these resistance leaders. And in the one case in Damascus, they missed and killed innocent family members. That's the Zionists for you. And they turn around after the response that they expected, that they knew would happen, that killed no one. Rockets land in open fields, cause little to no damage, and kill absolutely no Israelis, civilian or military, and they respond with massive airstrikes across the entire Gaza Strip, killing over 30 people. And that's somehow considered self-defense when they provoked the entire situation, knowing it would cause the rockets that caused no damage, and yet somehow those rockets that caused no damage, terrorism and a big threat to Israel. But the killing of innocent civilians, the destruction of civilian infrastructure in the besieged Gaza Strip that's barely livable, that's somehow self-defense. Like always, tensions calmed eventually after many, many innocent people were killed on the one side and no people were killed on the Israeli side. And once again, Syria is caught in these Zionist crosshairs. Just under 1 week after this escalation, Israel attacked Syria once again with wide-scale airstrikes across Damascus. Like always, they claim to be targeting Iran, and like always, the facts on the ground show another story altogether, with civilian infrastructure and Syrian army units being targeted rather than the Iranian Al-Quds force, which, by the way, is legally entitled to be inside the country. They are, after all, Syria's ally. For the details on this latest Israeli aggression against Syria, we're going to turn to South Front, coming from the Syrian War Report for November 21st.
On November 20th, the Israeli Defense Forces IDF announced that they had carried out wide-scale strikes on the Iranian Quds Force and the Syrian armed forces in Syria. The IDF claimed that the strikes were carried out in response to 4 rockets, which were reportedly launched from Syria at targets in northern Israel on November 19th. The IDF's Iron Dome intercepted these rockets over the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Commenting on the November 20th attack, the IDF claimed that it destroyed a number of Syrian air defense batteries because they respond to Israeli strikes. The IDF provided almost no details regarding the impact of its attack. However, photos and videos of the ground show that it successfully hit civilian buildings in southwest and west Damascus. At least 2 civilians were killed and several others were injured.
That's right, the IDF officially said that it struck Syrian air defense batteries because it did not refrain from defending itself against the Israeli attacks. During our strike of Iranian and Syrian terror targets, a Syrian air defense missile was fired despite clear warnings to refrain from such fire, the IDF tweeted, As a result, a number of Syrian aerial defense batteries were destroyed. No evidence was produced proving such claims, but the fact that they actually make these statements is absolutely insane. I think the hypocrisy is rather obvious, and no need to be getting into that further. Just imagine what would happen if Syria or Iran or Lebanon or the Palestinian resistance were to do the same thing to Israel and say, we're attacking you because you responded to our attacks. I think we all know how that would turn out. Next up, on the issue of Israel's continuing settlements on the West Bank, illegal, in violation of international law, in violation of UN treaties, in violation of the pre-1967 borders, we have the Trump administration making a shocking statement claiming that these are in fact no longer in violation of international law.
Turning now to Israel. The Trump administration is reversing the Obama administration's approach towards Israeli settlements. The establishment of Israeli civilian settlements in the West Bank is not, per se, inconsistent with international law.
The EU, on the other hand, disagrees and upholds their long-standing stance on the issue, condemning the Israeli settlements of the West Bank as a clear violation of international law.
The EU has a long-standing and well-known position that it will not recognize any changes to the pre-1967 Israeli borders other than those agreed by the parties to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The EU considers settlements in occupied territories illegal under international law.
But they denounce actually doing anything to pressure Israel to cease from their war crimes, and instead simply wants to label fruit and vegetables coming from the West Bank.
The EU does not support any form of boycott or sanctions against Israel, and the EU rejects attempts by the campaigns of the so-called boycott, divestment, sanctions movement to isolate Israel.
Well, if you think that makes absolutely no sense at all, you're not alone. Now we're going to turn to a recent interview on RT's Underground with former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and his response to all the recent Israeli aggression that we have just now covered.
But joining me now from Tel Aviv is Israeli diplomat Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Thanks so much, Ambassador, for coming on the show. We're having a general election here in Britain at the moment. We're under broadcast restrictions. Just wondered what you thought about the policy positions. Jeremy Corbyn saying he will ban weapons sales to Israel. The Tories disagree. Liberal Democrats appear to disagree, and the SNP appears to agree with Corbyn.
Yeah, well, I think it's unfortunate, and I think it's maybe lack of understanding, because anything that can keep stability in the region, if anything, it is Israel's deterrence power. And without our presence here, I'm afraid that there would be everybody fighting everybody else on this very, very small piece of land of ours.
Yes, it must be a lack of understanding to think that Israel's presence in that tiny strip of land, which used to be Palestine and now it's a military occupation, to think that that has anything to do with the violence in the region, and to think that what was once a peaceful land would suddenly be torn into violence with the people fighting the people because, well, Israel wasn't there. And by the way, maybe people don't want to give you weapons, Israel, because you're using the weapons to kill innocent people. You can call it deterrence all you like, but it doesn't turn your aggression into self-defense.
Of course, it's not just in Britain, though. Bernie Sanders, the Democrat presidential candidate for 2020, saying that military aid to Israel should be conditional, and that some of that military aid should actually be spent on humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza.
What we have seen for the last, well, I don't want to go too far, but let's say since the Oslo agreement, this is 1993, so we're talking 26 years ago, most of the pressure was directed at Israel.
Yes, maybe all the pressure has been against Israel because ever since 1967, it's been Israel who's been illegally occupying Syria's Golan Heights. It's been Israel who's been illegally, slowly, little by little, demolishing West Bank homes and creating new settlements in the West Bank in violation of international law, and continues to carry out unprovoked aggression against all of its neighbors with impunity, and not to mention the inhumane and illegal military siege against the Gaza Strip.
Ambassador, why are you talking about the Oslo Agreement? Obviously, Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, has said that he'll recognize Israeli illegal settlements, even quoting Ronald Reagan, even though, of course, Ronald Reagan said these illegal colonial settlements are ill-advised and represent an obstacle to peace. There's no Oslo Agreement at all now.
Well, the Oslo actually did not deal at all with the settlements.
Well, as I say, Pompeo first quoted Ronald Reagan, and of course the Oslo Accords were in the context of UN Security Council Resolution 446 about settlements, surely. Are you expecting violent retaliation from your enemies because of what they say is Israeli colonial atrocities?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
No, I don't think that we're facing any threat of attack from our enemies. That's why we need all these weapons that we've been designing, and the weapons from the UK and the US as a deterrent force against our enemies, because they're not going to attack us. Right, that makes so much sense.
If you're not expecting violent retaliation for this US violation of international law, why is the United States itself, Trump's State Department, saying all Americans right across the region should prepare for possible attacks on US government facilities, private interests, and citizens? I'm not sure whether that means on the same scale as Israeli killing in Gaza over recent years. The Americans certainly believe there will be violent retaliation.
Well, maybe they're privy to some information that I am not. Maybe some intelligent information. We have to remember the context also of the wider context in the Middle East is that not just Americans, but most, let's say, Western interests, and not just Western interests, also Sunni interests, I would say, are under threat from Shia militias that are supported by Iran.
Ah, yes, it always goes back to Iran. Iran is threatening Western interests, like, the U.S. imperial war machine that's currently occupying Syrian oil fields, and, the Zionist entity that's currently occupying Syrian Golan Heights and continually pushing further and further into the West Bank, illegally demolishing Palestinian homes to build their settlements, and constantly threatening Lebanon and Iran and Syria and Palestinians and the Gazans, and on it goes. And those Sunnis, yeah, Sunni interests like, the head-chopping Saudi Arabians, and don't forget the Al-Qaeda terrorists, they're the Sunni interests too. So, well, Iran's the bad guy though. Just remember, Iran, bad guy. Always remember that. Israel, good guy. Iran, bad guy. End of story.
Are under threat from Shia militias that are supported by Iran or by the Iranians' Al-Quds force. So that could be maybe the greatest context.
But Iran hasn't been bombing Israel in the past few days. Israel has been bombing Syria and, of course, has been bombing Gaza. What proof do you have of any Iranian bombardment of Israel?
Before the bombing that was announced by Israel, there were 4 rockets that were actually shot at Israel. Luckily, they were all intercepted by our ballistic, missile defense.
Notice how he didn't actually answer the question. He didn't actually offer any evidence whatsoever that those rockets that were allegedly fired from Syria even came from the Iranian Al-Quds force whatsoever. No evidence, just a claim, just a baseless claim, but it's their standard go-to line whenever they want to bomb Syria or Gaza or anyone. They say rockets were fired. It doesn't matter if the rockets actually hit anyone, hit infrastructure, hurt anyone. It doesn't matter. Just to claim rockets, and then they can do whatever they want, target anyone they want, and then say it's Iran, bad guy, fired rockets. Believe us. End of story. That's it. Iran fired rockets. It doesn't matter if the rockets didn't harm anyone. We're going to carry out airstrikes that kill civilians and destroy infrastructure, and that's how the Zionists play their game.
But Iran is very, very aggressive, and they work through proxies. They work through the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they work through Shia militias in Syria, and they have become ever more aggressive by actually using using actually their own forces, the Al-Quds force, and they have helped Assad take over his country after the civil war.
Oh man, Iran is such a bad guy, helping Assad take over his own country. Unbelievable. And that's the aggression that he's accusing Iran of, is helping the Syrian president take over his own country.
And they have helped Assad take over his country
After the civil war that took place there, with severe casualties. You know, we are talking about more than 600,000 deaths. And they're trying to dig in, open basically a second front against Israel. And we certainly will not allow that. If you look from a larger perspective, you see that Iran is trying to surround Israel from all sides.
Yes, Iran is trying to surround Israel from all sides, as you can see from these pictures here showing U.S. bases in the region. It's not like Iran is being surrounded by an Israeli proxy, the U.S. forces. Nope, not at all. And it's not like Israel put its occupation forces on Palestine and then continued to illegally expand into Syria's Golan Heights and into the West Bank and into Lebanon and so on and so forth. That's not what's happening. Nope, not at all. It's Iran trying to surround Israel. It's not Israel trying to surround Iran and isolate them and push them out of the area. Nope, not at all. There's only one way to look at this picture. Iran bad guy.
And we take seriously the announcements and declarations of the leaders of Iran that they want to erase Israel from the map.
Speaking of erasing someone from the map, there's only one entity in the region that not only threatens, but is also in the midst of actually wiping a nation from the face of the map, and that would be Israel in regards to Palestine. As can be seen by some of these statements, such as, "There are no innocent people in the Gaza Strip." That was the Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman in response to the targeting by Israeli snipers of innocent, unarmed demonstrators at the March of Return border protests. Statements and actions like these, as well as statements like the one following read out by an Irish parliamentary, betray the desire by Israel to wipe Palestine off the face of the map.
This is the Defense Minister, Moshe Yaalon, talking just a couple of weeks ago. Israel is going to hurt Lebanese civilians, to include kids of the family. We went through a very long discussion. We did it then. We did it in the Gaza Strip. We are going to do it in any round of hostilities in the future. That's the Defense Minister. This is the Minister for Education in the Netanyahu government. There will never be a peace plan with the Palestinians. I will do everything in my power to make sure they never get a state. He also said, if you catch terrorists, you simply have to kill them. I've killed a lot of Arabs in my life, and there's no problem with that. This is the Minister for Justice. Palestinians are all enemy combatants. This also includes the mothers of the martyrs. They should follow their sons. Nothing would be more just. They should go, as should the physical homes in which they raised the snakes. Otherwise, more little snakes will be raised there. That's the Israeli Minister for Justice in the last few months. The Israeli Deputy Minister for Defense. Palestinians are beasts. They are not human. The Minister for Foreign Affairs, C.P. Hockley, this is the last one. My position is that between the sea and the Jordan River, there needs to be one state only, the State of Israel. There is no place for any agreement of any kind that discusses the concession of Israeli sovereignty over lands conquered in 1967.
that they want to erase Israel from the map.
Iran denies that, Syria denies that, but there are pictures of President Netanyahu treating people in Syria, in the Golan Heights, associated with ISIS, Daesh, and Al-Qaeda. You just mentioned 600,000, a figure of 600,000 when it came to the Syrian civil war. Did your government support ISIS, Daesh, and Al-Qaeda in Syria? Does it ever support those groups?
No, no way. If you look at the charter or the beliefs of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, I think we are at the top of the list to be exterminated. And
once again, Zionist lies are refuted by the available evidence. Not only has the IDF admitted now to funding armed rebels in Syria that are affiliated with Al-Qaeda, not only has the Syrian government seized from Al-Qaeda and ISIS multiple munitions, arms, telecom sets, etc. from Israel, but Israel has also on many occasions been accused of acting as ISIS's air force. For example, last year when the Syrian army was on the verge of clearing the areas in southern Syria near the border with the occupied Golan Heights, Israel shot down a Syrian warplane which was at the time hunting ISIS terrorists. The ISIS terrorists then released footage celebrating the death of the pilot and this act of war against Syria, which obviously helped them. And this was not the first time Israel was observed acting in apparent defense of ISIS. But on top of that, they also evacuated hundreds of white helmets who have now been shown conclusively to be nothing more than a terrorist propaganda construct and basically the propaganda arm of Al-Qaeda in Syria. Along with these white helmets that were rescued, there were also commanders of various terrorist groups that also escaped with them into Israel during this evacuation. The number of terrorist commanders that Israel helped evacuate from southern Syria is unknown, although we know that 4 were identified and photographed in the Golan Heights immediately following their evacuation, and it has been verified since then that multiple terrorist leaders did use this white helmets evacuation as cover to escape Syrian forces. This has been verified in an interview by Vanessa Beeley with the white helmets commander who opted to stay behind rather than be evacuated, and who said that ISIS terrorists were among those evacuated by Israel. Also, in a Vice interview, an FSA so-called freedom fighter admits to being affiliated with Al-Qaeda. And this is one of those fighters receiving Israeli medical treatment of which he just said that they do not support the terrorists in any way.
We head into another room where 3 wounded Syrian fighters have been convalescing since July. 2 quickly covered their faces with blankets, but we could see the characteristic long hair of Islamist fighters. Outside, an IDF soldier remains on guard 24 hours a day. One of the 3 agreed to talk to us, 25-year-old Mohammed, who says he's a fighter for the Free Syrian Army, a collection of Western-backed rebel groups. Who were you fighting when you got injured? Was it Jabhat al-Nusra or was it the army?
لا جيش بشار طبعا. جبهة النصرة يعني مو بهذيك السوء هي اللي واصلة عنها السوء. احنا يعني معايشين جبهة النصرة هناك يعني. يعني جبهة النصرة يعني هناك يعني شو بدي أقول لك يعني تحل بعض المشاكل بين الناس، ممكن انها كونها يعني اسلاميه تحل بعض المشاكل، يعني ما تتدخل انها تقتل او كذا او تظلم حدا او هذا بحارب حدا، لا هي تحارب النظام فقط لا غير.
Now you've heard him say that al-Nusra is not that bad, that they coexist with al-Nusra, and that al-Nusra does not kill or oppress civilians in Syria. They only fight Bashar Assad's army. Now that's a lie, because what is al-Nusra? Al-Nusra Front is Al-Qaeda in Syria. Yes, the head-chopping Al-Qaeda, affiliated with ISIS at times. Wow, you can see it right from Wikipedia. Its aim was to establish an Islamic state in the country. That's right, not free the people and give Syrians democracy, free them from the evil dictator Bashar. Nope, to establish an Islamic state. Exactly what ISIS was doing. And yes, they killed plenty of civilians. These are terrorists. This is Al-Qaeda we're talking about here. And Israel is treating in their facilities terrorist fighters, so-called rebels that fight alongside Al-Qaeda, and they say that they're not supporting the terrorists, that they're not supporting Al-Qaeda. Give me a break.
Did your government support ISIS, Daesh and Al-Qaeda in Syria?
No, no way.
We know what terrorism is, unfortunately. We have suffered more than anyone else from Hezbollah terror group and Hamas terror groups, all of which are, by the way, recognized by the international community.
You deny the Israeli government had a part in funding Hamas's creation when it had a charter that was against the existence of Israel. Of course, like Iran, it recognizes a two-state solution now.
No, that wasn't, I wouldn't say Israel did that. There is a photograph of Netanyahu visiting a hospital, Israeli hospital in the north, which just for humanitarian basis received wounded from Syria. They were not ISIS or anything like that.
جبهة النصرة يعني مو بهذيك السوء هي اللي واصلة عنها السوء، احنا يعني معايشين جبهة النصرة هناك يعني.
We're about to talk to the journalist and director Abby Martin about her documentary film on Gaza. Does Israel continue to plan, do you think, to kill civilians at the Great March of Return? Thousands dead or injured, children is the accusation made in her film. Of course, this in the context, obviously, of 10 million Palestinian refugees now under UN Security Council 194 resolution who have the right of return.
Again, this is self-defense. When you come to marches into the border of Israel, unfortunately, these are not innocent people. Actually, they were selected and sent by Hamas, sometimes under gun threats, and we know that among them were and are embedded sharpshooters and other terrorists who would like to infiltrate.
Okay, well, the protesters, let alone the United Nations itself, completely contradicts everything you've just said.
This is self-defense. When you come to marches into the border of Israel, unfortunately, these are not innocent people. Actually, they were selected and sent by Hamas, sometimes under gun threats.
I mean, I have to laugh at that, Afshin. I looked at about 12 hours of protest footage. There wasn't one militant. There wasn't one weapon. And you can just look at the UN report, which is incontrovertibly proves extensive documentation of Israeli war crimes. We're talking about over 200 people that were gunned down with Israeli snipers. These snipers are perched up on a hilltop with a wide view of the demonstrations, and they literally just pick people off like it's target practice. Scores of civilians, but not only that, actual protected categories in the Geneva Convention's children, disabled people, medics. The vast majority of the people who were shot and gunned down, standing there wrapped in a Palestinian flag, standing there chanting national slogans, standing there filming the protest, or simply standing there doing nothing at all. This is all documented in the UN report, again, completely incontrovertible. But of course, they will always use this morally bankrupt argument that they're all human shields and all willing agents for Hamas.
And I've just got to ask, though, since there's a lot of debate here about the nuclear deterrent, and I know you think that Iran, despite its continued denunciation of nuclear weapons, is trying to get one. How many nuclear weapons does Israel have?
You know that Israel has a long historical position that we will not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons to the Middle East, and this continue to hold. But I don't think that you can compare Israel to Iran or to any other country. Certainly not.
No, certainly not. I agree. Only Israel can carry out war crimes on a nearly daily basis with impunity. Israel is the biggest nuclear superpower in the region. Iran doesn't even seek nuclear weapons. It's against their religious beliefs. And in fact, Iran has on numerous occasions called for a nuclear-free Middle East. Israel refuses to allow UN inspectors to inspect whether or not they're enriching uranium to levels capable of creating a nuclear bomb. Iran, on the other hand, allows UN inspectors in on a regular basis and has been verified that they are not doing so. In other words, their uranium levels that they're enriching are for energy use only. They're not building a nuclear bomb. This has been verified. Unlike all of its neighbors and countries in the region, Israel is the one country to refuse to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And, well, you get the idea.
But I don't think that you can compare Israel to Iran or to any other country. Certainly not when Israel has not threatened anybody.
Has not threatened anybody except the Palestinians, the Lebanese, the Syrians, and the Iranians, and even Iraq.
And is not planning to destroy any nation.
They're not planning to destroy any nation except Palestine, which they've already destroyed, and Lebanon, and Syria, and Iran.
But when the Iranians are planning and are saying it, you don't have to take it from me, just take it from them, that they are planning to destroy the Jewish state.
And when the Zionists are planning and in the process of destroying the Palestinian state, you don't have to take it from me, you just listen to their own words, as we've already done. They want to wipe the Palestinians off the face of the earth, and that's exactly what they're doing. Everything he's blaming Iran for is what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians.
But why don't you allow Mordecai Vanunu, the nuclear whistleblower kidnapped in Leicester Square in central London, to speak to the media about Israel's alleged nuclear weapons program?
Well, he had a contract. He signed, like, you know, any civil servant, or whether it's in the UK or Israel or anywhere else. You go into a classified position, and you're sworn in not to just disclose it. If you disclose it, you violate the law. So as any other democratic country, we uphold the law, and certainly we want to keep our interest and classified information away from the public, like any other normal country.
Ambassador, thank you.
Of course, if they had no nuclear weapons like he is claiming, there would be nothing for the whistleblower to release. And I do have to thank the ambassador there for making it so obvious the lies that are being told by the Zionists every time they're confronted about their war crimes and unprovoked aggressions in the region, and, you know, just making it blatantly obvious that absolutely everything they accuse their enemy Iran of doing is actually true about themselves, the State of Israel, the Zionist occupation of Palestine. And in other news regarding Iran, really shouldn't be much of a surprise. It looks like the U.S. is actually trying to provoke a war with Iran yet again. Over the past year in particular, they have been stepping up their attempts to effect regime change and topple the current Iranian government, and, well, it looks like they are back at it again. I came across this article entitled "Top U.S. General: It's very possible Iran will attack again. The threat from Tehran continues to increase despite U.S. military buildup," U.S. Central Command General Kenneth McKenzie says. Of course, stating that Iran will attack again implies that they already attacked. So, since I know of no attack, we're going to have to delve into this article to see just exactly how they're going to spin it. Since May, the Pentagon has dispatched 14,000 additional U.S. troops, an aircraft carrier, and tens of thousands of pounds of military equipment to the Middle East to respond to what it says are alarming new threats from Iran. Well, I don't know about you, but to me that almost looks more like the U.S. is actually the one threatening Iran. I mean, 14,000 U.S. troops? But despite the stepped-up U.S. military posture, the top U.S. general in the region believes the Iranian threat continues to rise, and Tehran is likely to continue lashing out. "I think the strike on Saudi Aramco in September is pretty indicative of a nation that is behaving irresponsibly," said General Kenneth McKenzie, the commander of U.S. Central Command, in a Friday interview, referring to the September 14th Iran-sponsored attack on Saudi facilities that took half of Riyadh's oil production offline. Only problem is, Iran had absolutely nothing to do with those attacks. They were carried out by the Yemeni Houthis, who are currently in a war against Saudi Arabia. Makes more sense. They also released photos of the weapons that they used. They took responsibility. They claimed that they carried out the attacks, and they offered the proof. The U.S. offered absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Iran had anything to do with it in any capacity other than simply being an ally with Yemen. In fact, the U.S. claims otherwise were so farcical and so self-contradictory that they had to abandon the narrative several days later, and then the media just kind of let it drop into oblivion, and, well, Yemen carried out another attack against Saudi Arabia, and the media didn't even cover it, and the U.S. didn't even make a big deal about it, didn't blame Iran, even though it was the same style of attack. And anyway, that's just how it goes. The warmongering on steroids, but they're back at it, going back to that farcical claim once again as they begin to beat the drums of war yet again, claiming that Iran is preparing to attack the U.S. despite the U.S. being the one that is building up its troops thousands of miles from its homeland. This is particularly alarming considering the timing, being that this announcement comes at the same time as U.S.-backed protests in Iran against the Iranian government are ongoing, and well, you're never going to believe what Mike Pompeo just tweeted in response to this current regime change effort. I have asked the Iranian protesters to send us their videos, photos, and information documenting the regime's crackdown on protesters. The U.S. will expose and sanction the abuses, says lie, cheat, and steal Secretary Pompeo. Well, that's just dandy, threatening more sanctions against an already sanctioned Iran. Yep, our sanctions are starving the Iranian civilians, but we're trying to protect the civilians against the evil, oppressive Iranian government. At least that's what they claim, while they, at the same time starve them and threaten to impose more sanctions that would only make conditions far worse. This is an act of war, and now they're threatening more acts of war. But Iran is the one that's a big threat that we need to stop, and this is certainly not more imperial warmongering in an attempt to provoke Iran so that we have an excuse to attack them and start another war. If it were, however, I would not count on it succeeding, considering the past dozen or so similar attempts over this past year alone have all failed miserably.